This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Pay It, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Pay It has your business covered.
Pay It connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. That's payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. It's that time of year when the clocks change and the nights draw in. The familiar starts to take on a new aspect as the shadows lengthen, and in the world of IT, trends that have been taken for granted are also starting to take on a new shape. Developers have started to question just how useful AI coding tools really are as the AI hype machine starts to run out of steam. Elsewhere, while OpenAI has had another successful funding round, is interest in the company starting to wane? And can other countries replicate the success of Iceland's 4-day working week? You're listening to the ITPro podcast. Hi, I'm Jane McCallion. My co-host Rory Bathgate is off this week, but joining me to discuss some of the most interesting news from October is ITPro's news and analysis editor, Ross Kelly. Ross, thank you for joining me.
Good to be back.
So let's kick off with Iceland's 4-day week. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the story? Because in some ways this isn't new. I'm sure some listeners will be familiar with this idea, having floated around for a little while.
Yeah, so essentially public sector organisations in Iceland ran a 4-day work scheme between 2015 and 2019. You know, these trials have been a major success by all accounts. There's been a lot of chat about the shift to the 4-day work week, which I'm sure we won't be moving to anytime soon. But a lot of workers in Iceland have definitely seen benefits in terms of, you know, improvements to work-life balance, the obvious reduction in hours. But yeah, I mean, Iceland hasn't taken a productivity hit in an economic sense, or, you know, in terms of the general business performance.
Yeah, and the figure that I saw was 59%. So is that 59% of public sector organisations or 59% of companies or workers who are now on the 4-day week?
Yeah, so this is public sector, so local government, various government agencies as well. So I mean, that is a significant portion. This was by 2022 though, so around 59% of those at that point had been offered, you know, a 4-day working week. So Autonomy's research, the organisation behind it, hasn't exactly gone into what that level is at this exact moment. However, you know, we're looking at a significant portion, more than half, of that workforce, various workforces, I suppose, being on a 4-day week.
Or having been offered it, at least.
Yes, absolutely.
I would be interested to know, obviously the research doesn't quite cover this, whether or not any private sector organisations have sort of followed suit. So I want to talk for a moment though, because the idea of the 4-day week is that you work less hours than a 5-day week. So it's not a compressed hours situation. You work sort of roughly half a day's worth less of hours, but you do that over the course of 4 days rather than 5. But when I looked at this, the reduced hours in Iceland with that sort of half a day taken out is 35 hours a week, which for most of us, I think, is still a full-time job and perhaps even equivalent with what they're doing now. I mean, I very recently was working jobs where it was 35 hours a week was the full-time standard. That's what you worked. And yeah, so this surely only kind of works out if you're working 40-hour weeks.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, we work, 37 and a half hours, so you'd essentially be removing 2.5 hours from, say, your Friday, if you were moving down to a 35-hour week. So it wouldn't really be a 4-day week in our case. But yeah, for a lot of workers, though, it's just that extra time out of the workplace, which, it's proven really beneficial to a lot of people, in terms of, like we said, work-life balance and, being able to spend time with family, being able to focus on hobbies, on just, I guess, chilling out if you're working a very intensive role. I mean, it definitely has had a positive impact on a lot of people in Iceland. You mentioned private sector previously. A big takeaway from this report was that this is something that should be considered potentially by a lot of private sector organisations, and they're urging a lot of industries to consider this also.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember speaking with an HR director and just saying, three-day weekends are the way forward, because when you've got a 2-day weekend, you spend the first of it, normally it's Saturday for most of us. Yeah, that's kind of like relaxing, but then the following day you're gearing up for the start of the week. If you've got a 3-day weekend, then you have one day that's winding down, one day to actually do something, and one day to have the Sunday scaries. But I mean, there are plenty of people probably in the UK actually who are already working a de facto 4-day week. I work a 4-day week because I compress our hours, or my hours, into, well, 4 days. So I'm not, kind of taking the hour cut without a pay cut, but the opportunity is there for some people. However, I was thinking, if we do kind of nail it down to this idea that, say you've got a 40-hour working week, you take off those 5 hours, so that's a bit more than half a day, and you take off those 5 hours without actually losing any money, and you're only working 4 days a week. Could this be replicated elsewhere? I mean, I'm thinking particularly of North America, the UK, and Australia, where, I'll be honest with you, as much as I would like for it to be something that took off here, I can't imagine that it would be.
I think it will definitely vary, on a regional, cultural basis. The UK's already had 4-day week trials. There was one that ended in 2023, I believe. It was a staggering amount. It was over 90% of, the participating companies chose to keep working with reduced hours
Mm.
at the same pay. And I think that's a really positive sign there, purely because the impact of that was really significant on workers. Burnout fell by around 71%. I think the percentage was. Sick days dropped significantly as well. So you had a more productive, or an equally productive workforce, but they weren't as burned out. They weren't taking sick days. They weren't as just knackered all the time, which is, why wouldn't you want that for your workforce? Obviously, that's the UK. In the US,
Yeah.
we can't speak to that exactly, but I'm sure there are a lot of organisations considering it or currently trialing it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, though, that you're then in the face of social pressures. So, the idea that, people working 5 days a week, 37 and a half, 40 hours a week, but doing so from home are lazy. People who want to work remotely are, or, be hybrid are lazy. And the idea of working 4 days a week and that being considered a full-time job, I can see that same kind of stigma attach itself. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'm a massive cynic, because I say so often on this particular podcast.
I mean, it is a sign of progress in some capacity. You go back to the beginning of the last century, and workers in a specific factory got their Saturday off, and that sparked a revolution, so to speak,
Yeah,
with other members of the working class in other comparable roles and industries, where they were going, well, there's other people working and they get better incentives, they have better working hours, safer conditions, and we want the same. I'm not suggesting the 4-day week trials are going to spark like an overhaul of sort of business and working norms, but I
the
mean,
real fourth industrial revolution.
yes, exactly. But I mean, it does show progress. And yeah, I do think there is going to be that sort of added dynamic there, where you could have people in the office 4 days a week at the same company, and then say people working from home 4 days a week. Is there going to be a bit of friction there between those two groups of workers? But I mean, that's just, we'll need to wait and see, I guess, how that pans out. But that obviously comes into the equation when you move into the private sector with this.
Yeah.
I feel there might be a little bit of friction there. But if you're to believe a lot of tech CEOs, then people working from home only really do about 2 days a week anyway. The rest of the time they're playing games and not really doing anything.
Well, unfortunately, for some people, no amount of data or anecdotes is going to change their minds, but that's just the way that some people are. Anyway, sticking with the workplace, one story that really caught my eye this month was the results of Google's State of DevOps report. So, 75% of the developers who were surveyed use AI for at least one daily task. 74.9 use it to write code. But the actual trust that they have in these AI tools, how much more productive they're making them, especially how good the code that's being generated is, doesn't seem to tally with how much it's being used.
Yeah, so this is something that we've reported on 2 or 3 times in the last couple of months based on various bits of research around the fact that, AI coding tools are being adopted en masse, across a lot of industries, but a lot of developers themselves seem to be reporting issues with code quality, code security. They're talking about the productivity benefits being great here, but then almost in some circumstances being negated by the fact they're having to then spend more time going back over code or
Yeah.
remediating issues in it. Google's study here is very interesting in that a significant portion said that they lack confidence in the code produced by these tools, which is concerning. But I mean, you could make the argument that any developer is going to go back over code and make sure that it's safe anyway. That seems to be a bit of a retort from a lot of AI proponents at the moment.
But what the results of this survey found are, like you say, a positive impact on productivity is what's being reported, but a 1.5% decrease in software delivery throughput and a 7.2% reduction in software delivery sustainability. So, yeah, this really kind of depends on how you measure productivity, because at the end of the day, if we were to sort of use a factory analogy, the number of boxes that you put out that are good quality the same at the end of the day, or more or less.
Yeah, I think that is the balancing act here for sure. In terms of software delivery, you could make the argument here that work is speeding up, things are moving quicker, the load is being lightened on developers, but when you get to the end product, there's an issue there that then compounds the problem, because then you're having to go back, you're having to fix code, you're having to rehash a lot of stuff that you're doing purely because what's been produced during what appeared to be a very productive period wasn't actually up to a solid standard. I think that the key takeaway here is that Google has said that this is an issue, but it can be overcome, it can be solved by just sticking to the basics in terms of software delivery, sticking to what you've always known. So essentially what they're saying is, yeah, these AI coding tools are really improving productivity. You're going to work faster, you're going to work smarter, but just do what you've been doing for years at this point. So
yeah. Also, anecdotally, I don't know, this is a complete anecdote that I'm bringing to the table, but I do wonder if this enhanced productivity, but with perhaps not such great outcomes, might have an impact on other people's productivity. Because I was speaking to somebody not that long ago who, a colleague of theirs came up to them and said, "Oh, I've created this code, but there's something not quite right with it. It's not running as it should be. Would you mind coming and have a look at it?" And it turned out that the person had created with ChatGPT or similar, and they couldn't spot the errors in there. And the person I was speaking to was like, "Well, look, I'm willing to kind of help you spot errors. All of us make errors that need a second pair of eyes, but I'm not going to teach you how to code. You need to do that bit yourself. You can't just rely on generative AI to do it
yeah,
for you." And so I do wonder if there might be an impact, elsewhere in the chain as well.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, we've covered a couple of bits of research on this, and we had something from an organization called Black Duck Software that was last month, talking about the fact that issues around AI generated code quality had reached such an extent that it's actively slowing down development life cycles. This is because security testing practices had to be expanded to accommodate for inconsistencies, any incorrect code, any issues, and just having more members of the team having to jump into something to double check that everything is good to go and that everything is safe and gold standard. I mean, that there, you can talk about productivity improvements, but if you're having to bring 1, 2, 3 colleagues into something to make sure that what you've done is correct, I mean, are you just offsetting those productivity improvements on a daily basis? Potentially might not add up on maybe a daily basis, but over the course of a month or a year, then yeah, definitely.
Okay, finally, we have another AI-related story. OpenAI, the progenitor of ChatGPT and the company that fired the starting gun on the generative AI bonanza, raised $6.6 billion in funding at the very beginning of the month. But as our headline states, it drove a bit of a hard bargain. According to sources speaking to Reuters, companies that wanted to invest in OpenAI in this round of funding would do so on the agreement that they will not invest in Anthropic, XAI, which is Elon Musk's baby, Safe Superintelligence, which was created by one of the founders of OpenAI, who has since left, Perplexity, or Glean. So it seems like a fairly stringent clause, if it's to be believed, but it doesn't really seem to have put people off from investing.
Yeah, I mean, $6.6 billion, it's big money here, and OpenAI has been absolutely swamped with money over the last 2 years, and they're coming back for another funding round. Big names in there, in terms of who's backed them, but it is a peculiar sort of clause, I suppose you could say. If you ask me, I think it makes perfect sense from OpenAI's perspective. Anthropic is, very much viewed as that a big rival within the generative AI space to OpenAI. But yeah, I mean, XAI and Safe Superintelligence. Safe Superintelligence was founded by Ilya Sutskever, former CTO, who's now left OpenAI, one of the various executives that have jumped ship over the last few months. So from OpenAI's perspective, yeah, like I said, it does make sense. But I mean, there are strict clauses within this funding round. Thrive Capital, one of the backers, has an option to invest another $1 billion next year. And again, this is sources telling Reuters. But that's if OpenAI reaches an undisclosed, or as of yet, undisclosed revenue goal. There are other clauses that if they don't reach this revenue goal, investors can renegotiate terms or, take back funds based on whether, restructuring plans at the company go ahead or not. So, I mean, it seems like a bit of a minefield for all parties involved. But that undisclosed revenue goal thing has, been a big talking point at OpenAI over the last couple of months. We reported on, some news in August. This was based on reporting from The Information that suggested that OpenAI was running out of runway at that point. Projected losses of around $5 billion. OpenAI has, huge costs associated with it. Training and inference costs are expected to reach about $7 billion in 2024, moving into 2025. $1.5 billion spending on staff, because they, the people at that company are there for a reason and they're charging a premium, but they're only bringing in around $3.5 billion in revenue. So there have been a lot of, questions over whether or not it's, sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, very much my opinion here, but not just with regards to OpenAI, but the generative AI space in general has a bubbly feel to it.
It's a too big to fail feel with OpenAI, I think.
Oh, no, not even. It reminds me of, I mean, maybe. There were survivors from the dot-com boom, from the dot-com bubble. There were survivors. eBay, PayPal, all these, companies that emerged at the beginning of the millennium, a bit earlier than that, sort of towards, in the 90s, but just as the internet was really taking off, but nobody kind of quite knew what it was for. And so companies are springing up and people pouring loads of money in. But in the end, there's nothing of any substance there, then it's going to go pop eventually. So we'll have to see how. And like I say, that's not just OpenAI; it's the generative AI market in general that gives me that feel. You did mention earlier about OpenAI restructuring, so that's fairly important. Until this point, you wouldn't know it because we do keep talking about profitability and revenue versus expenditure and so on. But OpenAI has been a non-profit up until this point. However, it is going to restructure itself over the course of the next 2 years to become a for-profit company. So that doesn't mean publicly traded necessarily or anything like that, but it is going to become a profit generating, they hope, company. And that's a big change. That's one of the things that's seen sort of the final clutch of executives, and all but 3 of the founders have now jumped ship.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back to the shenanigans in November last year around Sam Altman being ousted, alongside Greg Brockman, that was a big talking point then around the fact that a few executives didn't like the direction the company was being taken in. For a non-profit company to be so deeply embedded with Microsoft and pursuing this sort of new route, that was a big point of contention for a lot of people. But I mean, if you're Microsoft at the moment, you want OpenAI to be profitable because, I mean, so much of your core services, product solutions have OpenAI woven into them that for the company to go, Pete Tong, I think, that's a disaster, an absolute disaster. And then at that point, there's, a lot of money being thrown around if Microsoft has to essentially, absorb all of it. Obviously, we're not suggesting that's going to happen anytime soon.
And it is, a lot of companies struggle with profitability. We see, I think there's a statement that's something like 250 million people use OpenAI each day. This is an incredible amount of people, if I've remembered that correctly. But if they're all using the free tier, it's very difficult to convert people into paying customers once you've given them an extensive free trial. I don't, there are people who are paying for it. I hang out on, maybe not hang out on, I dip into the GPT subreddit, and it's amazing what this stuff can do, especially on the paid tiers where you can do a bit more than you can on the free tiers. But those 250 million users, you're not going to get all of them to pay. You're not. And that's the difficulty that social media companies have faced. X, formerly known as Twitter, I believe still faces this problem, even though they've started charging for example, blue ticks verification and get rid of ads and blah, blah, blah. Actually generating money from stuff that is basically free to use is difficult. It's an intractable problem. And getting around this, it's going to be difficult for them. People, when they talk about generative AI or just AI, what they mean often is ChatGPT. But that doesn't mean, just because it's popular, most people know it, it's the only generative AI system that I have used. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to make people pay for it, especially if they're just casual users.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the costs associated with just running ChatGPT for OpenAI, it is, I mean, crazy. We covered this last year, $700,000 a day.
I saw something earlier as well about that they're expected to bring in $11 billion in revenue next fiscal year, I guess. But that's, once again, it's meaningless if you could keep bringing in as much revenue as you like, more and more and more and more revenue. But if your costs are escalating at the same time and you're not able to bring in new streams of revenue or monetize something else in a different way, then you've got a problem.
I mean, it's an issue reflected across the entire startup landscape globally. I think last year, 2023, only 4 of Europe's unicorn tech companies were actually profitable. So when you look at what's happened over the last 2 years with generative AI, I do get the feeling that OpenAI and a lot of other companies, even your big major tech brands, Microsoft, Google, AWS, you get a feeling that it's let's just ride this sort of turbulence for a little while. We're going to be spending a lot, we're going to be losing a lot, but eventually,
Yeah.
something's going to stick, and we'll start seeing, returns on investment at an enterprise level, and then that will create, a domino effect where more people keep adopting, keep shifting to this, and then eventually we're going to, be absolutely rolling in the money. But yeah, it does have a bubble feel to it. And I know a lot of people say this isn't a bubble, this is, transformative, this is the next evolutionary step in, human technology and etc., etc. But there definitely is just we're spending a lot of money here, and a lot of people are getting a lot out of it, but a lot of people aren't.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but Ross, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be back, and I'll see you next month.
As always, you can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website at ITPro.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, as well as subscribing to our daily newsletter. You can subscribe to the ITPro podcast wherever you find podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And if you're enjoying the show, spread the word by leaving us a rating and a review. Rory and I will be back next week with more from the world of IT. But until then, goodbye.
This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Pay It, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Pay It has your business covered.
Pay It connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. That's payitbynatwest.com/ITPro.